Welcome back to our third week of the Times Convert Book Club and Read Along. I'm looking at my notes over here. This week we're doing chapters 18 to 27. And we are joined by Ducky the cat, who thinks that she would like to have her lunch right now. So if you hear a little meowing in the background, no cats were harmed in the making of this video. It's just Ducky asking for something to eat. So what are these chapters about in this third week? I think the most important concepts to think about as you read these chapters are consequences and responsibility. And, I think that we are in a time right now where, we'd rather avoid consequences and responsibility than face them, which means for a lot of us, we're terrified of making mistakes, which means we're perfectionists, which means we're stressed out all the time. And in terms of accepting responsibility, I think there's a general sense that if you can blame somebody else for your actions, that's preferable than just standing up and saying, I apologize. I think this is actually linked to perfectionism, right? Because if you feel like there will be bad consequences if you're not perfect, then of course what you don't want to say, I'm so sorry, that was a mistake. Please accept my apology. How can I make it better? Instead, we're really in a kind of blame and shame moment of history where that's taking accountability, being responsible for your actions, and being willing to take risks and then, face the consequences of those risks. I don't think those are particularly valued right now. I can tell you that they were very much valued in the 18th century when America was coming into being. The art of a true apology was much more prevalent in courts of law than any other kind of lawsuit. Making good on a complaint often involved taking public accountability, making a financial reparation, but certainly not being blamed or shamed into anything. And I think it's relevant for this story because, first of all, Phoebe is really having to learn to control herself as a vampire. This is a prerequisite in order for her and Marcus to be together. There's a kind of tradition that a new vampire is really kept in isolation, trying to bend those rules a little bit and get to see each other quicker, but it's very dangerous. Phoebe is a very volatile young vampire who is wielding power she doesn't fully understand and has no experience with. And therefore, guess what? She's going to make mistakes. Similarly with Marcus is going back to his past, remembering what it was like when he was a fledgling vampire and he made lots of mistakes. Again, Matthew was like, yeah, you sink or swim, go out in the world, have fun. Not great parenting, and certainly not what Matthew and Diana are grappling with here. They're kind of helicopter parents, just to give you a full disclosure. But for Marcus, it's complicated by the fact that he is over in France during the French Revolution and its aftermath. Marcus thinks, this is great. I love a good revolution. I fought in one. Now I'm here. He's there kind of under Matthew's supervision, but really it's Philippe and Isabeau are keeping their eye on him. Seeing Philippe and Isabeau in the midst of the immediate aftermath of the French Revolution is a gas. Again, if you want to see one of my inspirations for my characters, you can Google Lindsay Duncan, Dangerous Liaisons, and you will see a picture of the young Lindsay Duncan who played Isabeau in the television show, lounging on a beautiful upholstered chaise lounge in a gorgeous revolutionary dress with Alan Rickman at her feet. And that was one of my images for Isabeau way back when I started A Discovery of Witches. So can you believe that they cast Lindsay Duncan as Isabeau? It was like all my dreams come true. But thinking of Philippe and Isabeau swanning around in revolutionary Paris was just absolutely delicious. I love these moments of seeing the two of them together, and I hope we see more of them in the future. But one of the things that happens to Marcus is faced with now the consequences of a revolution. He's left America and he's in France, and the French Revolution is getting more bloody, more terrifying, and more radical as every day passes. And the violence is quite startling. And the other thing that's quite startling is the way in which former revolutionary allies begin to split from each other and to form very dangerous factions. And that those political factions end up engaged in a kind of war to the death for someone to triumph over the rest. I think, again, we can see a lot of that in America. It might have taken a little longer for some of these disruptions to occur. The Civil War in America was certainly a point where suddenly what had once been an allied group had become so divergent on issues of states' rights and slavery that it came to bloodshed. And certainly there are other moments as well when that has happened in world history. If you're European, you could think of moments in your own history: the English Civil War, the Spanish Civil War, the World Wars. They are all ways in which allegiances that were formed as part of a rebellion or part of an uprising, they begin to kind of eat in on themselves. And that has to do with what we talked about last week, with this clash between ideals and actual pragmatic experiences and solutions. I do think this is very resonant for our own time. I think there are people who vote on ideals, or they vote pragmatically, and often there are real clashes, even within a single political party, between the people who want to stand for principles and the people who want to stand for pragmatism. And certainly Marcus is in the thick of that in France. And I chose France rather than playing it out in America because, hey, I'm American, and sometimes it's easier for us to see clearly the mistakes made by other folks as opposed to ourselves, right? What we might be able to see quite clearly in France, we'd squabble over and argue about when it came to America. But these chapters are really about maturity. And I think for Matthew and Diana, they have a kind of sense that, we just need to run away and hide our children from this cruel world where people hate others because they're different, and a real understanding that that's not an option, that they are revolutionaries in their own way, and that the children are the consequence of their revolutionary actions. And now they have to accept responsibility for that and to lead by example and to not parent out of shame, but to parent out of love and out of leadership. So yeah, these are all about consequences, responsibility, and I think they're also about the wisdom and maturity of realizing the world is far from perfect and we have to find a way to survive within it. The alternatives are not really any more appealing than the pragmatic need to, as Philippe de Clermont tells us, think and stay alive. And that's what's really running like a ribbon through all these chapters as we move towards the very end of the book. How are Phoebe and Marcus and Diana and Matthew and Pip and Becca going to use the greatest weapon of all, their brains, to think and stay alive in a very challenging and often disappointing world? So I hope you enjoy reading these chapters. I think there's a lot of food for thought. It'll be really interesting to see if there are any particular passages or quotes that really stand out to you on this reading. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion, which is happening very soon. See you next week.